That's so nice. Okay. Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexandra, if you're new here, and I am a professional fashion designer, pattern cutter, and creative consultant. But I do just want to follow that up with my zone of genius is clothing, not accessories. And this video is going to be taking you across the design and development process of this guy. Because I don't know if you remember any returning viewers, me saying at the beginning of the year, something along the lines of, now I use a really old, battered, grey backpack. I've had it for years, it's literally battered. I've had it since I was a student. So I've had it for over a decade, and I don't really want the student vibes. I'm becoming a grown woman, I'm over 30. It's time to up level to a canvas tote, but I really want to have a designed canvas tote. I'm not just talking about the kind of winged silhouette with 2 carry handles. I'm gonna have fun with it, and that's got me excited. But you guys who do follow me on Instagram at Digital Pattern Library have actually helped me design this. So we're going to be jumping into it today, but I wanted to say a big thank you to Morplan for partnering with me on this video and making this entire process possible. This was in the pipeline way before they approached me, and even further before that, if we genuinely go back over 10 years, I have been a paying customer of Morplan since the dawn of time. So you may have seen my video talking about my holy grail, which is my Pattern Master. This is an all-in-one tool for drafting patterns. And again, let me get this the right way around. Have a little look at that logo. I'm telling you guys, I use Morplan. I have sincerely, ever since I started university, been a very satisfied paying customer of Morplan. They genuinely are a one-stop shop for me to get all of my fashion supplies so that I can develop my 2D ideas into 3D reality. And what better than to kind of test that with an area I'm not as confident in, which is bag design and accessories. And thanks to Morplan, I've been using their tools and materials to make this idea come to life. So without further ado, and in typical Digital Pattern Library style, I want to take you through the entire creative process from create, cut, and construct. And I'm going to walk you through it. For anybody who has been following me over on Instagram at Digital Pattern Library, you may have played a part in the design of this. So stick around, follow along, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's jump into it. Now, obviously, to start with any idea, I needed to jot down and visually communicate some concepts. So on a random page in a random sketchbook, I did just that. I started scribbling, and 9 out of 10 times, it's usually the first idea that I tend to run with. But again, I was using scale and proportion techniques, just changing around some of the design details with really small, subtle changes, whether that is moving the pocket, changing a welt to a zip, adding a ruffle, moving the placement of the ruffle. And I just jotted some ideas down. I then polled you guys on Instagram in terms of which one you like the most. And I feel like we were in unanimous agreement. It's a really powerful exercise to explore ideas and concepts anyway, exhaust all pathways, because then you know that when you are proceeding with your chosen design, it's the strongest design of the bunch. So I've got a scrap piece of pattern paper here. The reason why I wouldn't use printer paper is just because it's a little bit more structured and sturdy. What I tend to do when I'm trying to figure out a design is I actually draft it up in paper first before cutting cloth. So let's recap. I think I'm going for this one. This is the one you guys voted for. I kind of liked this one, but this is cute, and I think I'm going to be able to share the pattern quite easily with you. So the first thing I need to do is just basically analyze what's going on here. So if I bring it over here, equip myself with a ruler and a mechanical pencil, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and translate the shapes I'm seeing. So I know that the center of the bag is going to be almost like a trapeze shape. So I know that I need another sewing pattern roughly this size and this shape, so I might be able to trace that off. So this is going to end up being my pocket that goes over. I now need to do the side pieces. I want it narrower at the bottom than at the top because I want to create this kind of winged effect. This means that the width of this pattern piece here is a lot narrower at the bottom, and we've got a lot more fabric to the top here. So this needs to be almost like a funnel shape. This is actually such a top tip when you are developing an idea to save on resources. There is no need to constantly cut out full size patterns just to make amendments. So I kind of had this really fun origami moment of just paper crafting and testing my idea. This actually meant that I didn't make a single change to my final full-size pattern. I know, who am I? But I had fun with this. I tested out the proportions, I created a ruffle, I used a bit of Pritt stick, scrap bit of pattern paper, and I really made sure that my design was able to work, that the pattern pieces aligned. And then you'll notice that I transferred the quarter scale measurements into my sketchbook on the opposite page so that I could scale it up when I come to do my full size pattern. Now, small amendments were made in terms of the proportion and depth of my front pocket. I had to work out the full length of my one-piece strap. But yeah, all in all, a very successful process without having to waste final large-scale resources, and I didn't have to cut a single piece of calico in order to test if this idea had legs. Plus, look how adorable this mini paper tote bag is. I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep this on my pin board for years to come. Before we get into it, I just want to address the elephant in the room, which is my horrible, bunged up voiceover. I can only apologise. I have literally, it's so rude, come down with some sort of flu in the middle of July. What is that? Anyway, to start scaling my mini experiment up into a full-size pattern, I basically eyeballed the desired proportions of my bag. I knew I wanted it to roughly be about 50 to 60 centimeters wide with a specific depth, which I very crudely determined by simply dangling a tape measure next to my body so I could just eyeball how deep I wanted the bag. I then divided these full-size measurements by my mini pattern to work out the multiplication so I could scale the rest of the pattern up proportionately. It really wasn't rocket science, but once I kind of got my head around that, it all went quite smoothly. I won't go into the nitty-gritty because you can download the pattern below and I'll save you the headache, but even as I was drafting, I continued to make small changes to the design. For example, the mini version had a self-faced edge, meaning the top of the tote bag folded down on itself. However, I decided to change this to a separate facing piece so that I could attach the lining separately and ensure a precise shape to the winged silhouette of the tote. I also added depth to the base of the bag. You'll see that I stick additional pieces of pattern paper together using masking tape to Frankenstein these changes. And whilst part of my signature Create, Cut, Construct framework is all about pattern cutting and engineering the design, there are still design decisions being made as part of the creative process, which you'll witness me do here. So even as I work through the logical steps of pattern cutting, you'll see me fold, stick, testing the pattern as I go to ensure that the seams align and that the three-dimensional shape, once stitched, results in my desired vision. For anybody interested, the tools I use in this phase of the project, and they include pattern paper and paper scissors. Let's not get that twisted, definitely paper-specific scissors, and do not use your fabric shears on paper, need I say more. My trusty Pattern Master, which I've already done an entire video on, but it's an all-in-one drafting tool that combines a set square with a French curve, a ruler. It makes adding seam allowance super easy. I honestly use this day in, day out. Mechanical pencils for the sole purpose of having an accurate sharp nib that can easily be replenished for millimeter precision. I've obviously used a calculator just to scale up my mini experiment, masking tape or glue, and a tracing wheel. You'll also see me iron my pattern paper. This is a nice nifty little tip. I definitely make sure that I am working on a wrinkle-free surface, again for the purpose of accuracy, and you'll see me store my patterns in an A4 manila envelope. It helps me organize my studio. I tend to label these envelopes with the project name, the photo or illustration of the style, the number of pattern pieces, the size, the date, the fabric requirements. It's integral that you label your patterns precisely, and this is a definitely do as I say, not as I do moment, because I actually found myself staring at two similar pattern pieces for longer than I care to admit because I hadn't labeled them properly and couldn't differentiate between the strap of my bag and the ruffle piece of my bag, even though it is quite obvious because one of them's a lot longer. But hey, it had been a long day. which is why I very much needed a coffee topper. So you're going to see me have many coffee breaks throughout this. I do think 99% of my career is fueled on caffeine. So day 2 was all about construction, and I would probably say in total this took about 3 hours of my time to make. But the first thing I needed to do was run it by you guys in terms of what lining would best suit the canvas tote. So I added this to Instagram and awaited your poll results. The first step at the iron was to double fold the top edge of my front pocket. So this was 0.5 centimeters before folding down again by 1 centimeter and just pressing that with a nice hot iron. I then took my 1-piece long straps, folded them in half, and then folded them in half again. So I met both edges into the middle crease that I had created with the iron and then folded them again. So basically everything was nice and enclosed. Over at the sewing machine, I then did a line of stitching just to secure that folded top edge down on my front pocket before turning my attention to the edge of my long straps. It's really important that you fold with accuracy because you are going to be edge stitching this closed so that the fold can't open and it actually becomes a nice, secure, fairly structured strap of fabric. So you'll notice here that my edge stitching has actually secured this closed, and I just repeat that on the second strap as well. In a bid to incorporate an additional design detail, I then had the time-consuming but definitely worth it idea of just doing a repetitive line of top stitching along the strap. So I would line my foot up against the edge, and half my foot width is about 0.5 centimeters. So I just continued to do a repetitive vertical line of stitching. This is also a great way to practice how straight you can sew. And a top tip for this is to stop looking at your needle and thread and to start looking at the edge of your fabric. It genuinely will transform your sewing because it's a great way to keep your work straight and on track. I just thought this was a really sweet detail. I didn't use top stitching thread. If I was to make this again, that might be a change I would incorporate, but I think it was a really subtle design detail nonetheless. The next step is to construct my statement ruffle pieces. These are simply long rectangular pieces of fabric. If you are going to be doing a ruffle, you want it to be at least 3 to 4 times the length of your desired section that you want to condense the fabric into. This is going to ensure that you have enough volume to create that feminine little design detail. So I fold this panel in half at the iron and give it a good press before sewing down the 2 short edges either side. You'll then see me trim away any excess, turn that through and give it another press. To gather the ruffle, I do 2 lines of stitching all along the long open edge. I do not back tack, it's really important, and I use the longest stitch setting on my sewing machine, which for me is about 4 millimeters. Then pulling on the bobbin threads ever so carefully, I start to gather this panel of fabric. An alternative method, if you don't have the patience, would be to use a gathering foot on your machine, but I just like the manual control that doing this by hand with 2 lines of stitching can give you. So there are feet out there, there's gadgets and gizmos to help you. Just test it out and see what you prefer for your creative process. As I was laying my pieces out, I remembered these labels I had made as a student, and I very seldom incorporate them into my projects at the moment unless I'm making something personal. I'm a little bit of a hoarder as a creative, so I've always got things to hand and in my little notions box. So I just dug these out and thought it would be a cute opportunity to add it to the center of my front pocket. To just mark the center, I folded the panel in half and then positioned my label accordingly before top stitching it in place. I think it's a nice little personalized detail. So this would be a fantastic opportunity for you to do your version of adding that personal touch. I then checked in with the process by laying out my pieces and just seeing where I was at before fusing the base of my bag patterns. So I'm using iron-on heavyweight interfacing just to give it that extra structure and support. This is going to be a practical project after all, and so I'm just applying glue side down with a dry hot iron onto my fabric panel.
Once that's done, I basted my front pocket in place within the seam allowance. Again, no need to backstitch here, it's just securing my work, before placing my straps on top. Now I make sure that these straps are positioned 1.5 centimeters from the edge. I do not want them getting caught in the seam allowance, but it does require a little bit of precise sewing in order for this technique and aesthetic to work. So then I edge stitch my straps in place along the existing stitching line, so it should have a relatively invisible finish. But notice when I get to the edge of the front pocket, I reinforce the corners. This will become a stress point when the bag is in use. And so I basically do a bounding box with a cross through the middle, and this just ensures that everything is secure and reinforced accordingly. You'll also notice that I leave a good inch or so to the top of the bag. This is to make sure that I have enough space to also have seam allowance to sew my facing panel pieces on. So I'm just giving my straps ample room so that they don't get caught in my work at a later point in construction. Once my straps are secured in place on both front and back bag panel pieces, that was nearly difficult to say, I match them up at the base and sew them right sides together. The notches are going to help you, the strap positions are going to help you, but you want to try and get this as accurate as possible so that it has a nice seamless continuation of that strap detail running along the base. Take this over to the iron and give it a press. You can press your seams open, and then you just want to run another line of top stitching either side of your seam, again, just to reinforce the base of your bag. So working with the ruffles can be a little bit fiddly due to the volume and density of the fabric. We've got many folds of fabric here that just create a lot of bulk. So take your time. Whilst I was pinning this, it did bend a couple of my pins. So you may want to opt for clips instead or baste it in place with a bit of hand stitching. Other really important things to note at this point of construction include positioning it down at least 1.5 centimeters from the top edge, because again, we want to make sure that we have that seam allowance available when we come to construct our facing. You want to be positioning it right along the edge. This is a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. We do not want to catch our strap in that, hence why we've positioned it 1.5 centimeters in from the edge. And of course, we want this to be equal on both sides. At the moment, the ruffles are pointing inwards towards the front pocket, but what we're going to end up doing once we sandwich it between the side panel layer, that is the winged part of the tote, is we will press the seam allowance under and understitch this in place. This is going to ensure that the ruffles point flat in the right direction and everything is nice and secure. I'm then sandwiching my ruffles between the tote bag front panel and the tote bag side panel. Just make sure that when you are placing this, the wider top edge of the side panel goes to the top of the bag and the narrower edge goes to the base of the bag. You just want to make sure that you're not getting your panels upside down. Otherwise, this is going to throw the silhouette of the design off. If your machine is struggling with the width and the layers of fabric, try altering your stitch length to a longer stitch length. This can often help us when we are dealing with bulk. It's now time to match the outstanding seams of your side panel to your back center panel. Pin in place and sew a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. I then take this over to the iron to press the remaining seams open. Using a sleeve press really helps me get inside the nooks and crannies. I hate that saying, it sounds so weird, but it does help you with all of the fiddly bits. So just make sure that your bag is having a good press. Do not be afraid of the iron. The iron is your friend, especially when we're using calico. It can actually take a really good amount of steam and pressing. So just make sure that you have that crisp, neat finish. So now that the silhouette of your bag has come together, you're going to notice two holes in the corner of your base. We're now going to be securing those closed. So what I want you to do with your bag turned inside out is just get your fingers into the very corner of these notches and pull them taut. You're going to notice that this straightens it out. It should match nicely, and you can sew a 1.5 centimeter straight line of stitching to close the base of your bag. If this is confusing you, have a little look at the video I shared and published directly before this one. It is a free fabric planter basket pattern. It is the exact same technique. It's just a bit more of a beginner-friendly approach. So bear with it, play around with it, but pull it taut and it will all make sense. You then just want to secure that closed with a line of stitching. Don't forget to back tack. And again, if your machine is struggling with the bulk of your material, then make sure you are using a needle that is thick enough, but also a longer stitch length. Don't forget, when you are constructing, just make sure that you are keeping your straps and your ruffles out of the way. You don't want to catch them with the machine. But once you get to this stage, my friend, do as I do and put it on the stand, have a little celebratory dance around your studio, because it all starts to come together, and this is where it gets quite exciting. Now, before I went forward and constructed the lining, I had the very important task of checking in with you guys on Instagram to see how you voted, and I was very pleased to see we were on the same page, because I too think the stripe was the most complimentary, and I'm so glad the majority ruled this as well. But to be totally transparent in the journey of having a creative process, as I cut out my lining, I genuinely realised I hadn't actually drafted or forecast for a pocket. What kind of practical fashion designer would I be without putting a pocket in the lining? So I had to wing a welt pocket. It's one of my favourite ones to construct. They're quite quick to do once you kind of understand the process, but they can be technical. So let's walk through this. I basically established where I wanted to place it on my lining, which again was quite central. Because this wasn't notched on the pattern, I did what I did before, where I folded my panel piece in half just to determine roughly where the center line is. And then I interfaced it again with some iron-on fusing just to reinforce this area, as I will ultimately be cutting a hole in the fabric and it will become a stress point once it is used as a pocket. So you'll see me mark out both my fusing and my pocket piece. With my fusing, you want it to be at least an inch bigger either side of the width of your pocket. So say my pocket was 14 centimeters, I'd actually be drafting out 19 centimeters, which gives me 2.5 centimeters either side of the pocket opening. I hope that makes sense. So that is how I determined the size of my fusing piece. And then of course I did the same for my pocket piece. So whatever the size of your visual part of the pocket, you definitely want to be cutting out a panel that is considerably bigger to give you wiggle room for slitting, turning through and folding, as we will do shortly. I then also cut a really long strip of fabric that was going to be my pocket bag. Again, there's no rhyme or reason to the length of this. I was eyeballing it in a sheer panic that I'd forgotten to include a pocket. But as long as when this folds back on itself, it obviously doesn't overhang on your lining and it's all nice and contained, then it's a great use of scraps as well. So once I had all my pieces cut out, I fused my lining on the wrong side, and then I stitched a very neat and very precise binding box. You don't want to overshoot with your stitching on this, so take your time and use the hand wheel if necessary, but make sure you are back stitching in the corners and ensuring that your lines of stitching are nice and straight. Once I'd sewn this bounding box, I just made an incision right along the center of it, and before I got to the corners, I stopped about 1.5 centimeters before the end, and you'll see me make diagonal cuts towards the very corner of my bounding box. Please make sure you do not snip through your stitching. This is the integral part. The shape of this box is essentially what will be viewed. And I know that this is inside the interior of the bag, but what I'm trying to teach is making everything you produce as beautiful on the inside as it is on the out. Following your incision, you want to turn everything through and give that a good press at the iron. This is when you can see if you have made any sins, if your stitching is nice and neat. But again, don't be afraid of using a nice hot iron. My lining here is cotton, it's shirting fabric, it's what I had knocking around, and so I know that it can take it. Use a pressing cloth where applicable if your textile needs it. Always try and sample first before you do any stitching or pressing, just to see how the fabric reacts. But again, a canvas tote, it's pretty straightforward and it's pretty beginner friendly. And even this welt pocket just consists of straight lines of stitching. This whole thing is a straight line of stitching project, which in my books is relatively beginner friendly, but just challenge yourself, have fun with this. You could absolutely do a patch pocket instead of a welt pocket, whatever you feel comfortable doing. This is the beauty of making your own wardrobe. So once everything is pressed through, I'm just attaching my pocket bag to the welt section, the welt panel, and I'm just doing a line of stitching to secure those together so they become one long piece. Don't forget to press your seam open. At this point, you can fold your pocket lining up to cover the hole and the letterbox shape at the top of the pocket opening. Flip it round to the right side, give it all a good press, and you just want to pin that in place so that it's nice and precise. This is probably the most technical part, but you want to then flip your work right side facing you out of your way. So you want to expose the layers of fabric underneath, and you'll see two triangular tabs from when you made that diagonal incision. And what you want to do, just with a straight line of stitching, is secure that down. This is going to make sure that your pocket opening doesn't have any wiggle room. It doesn't kind of shift under use or pressure. Everything is secured in place and you have a really nice, neat opening. You want to do the same for the long edges around the opening as well. So with your work right side facing you, you just want to flip the layers of material down to expose the construction underneath and just secure that in place. Just slow this video down if you need to. There is a settings wheel in the bottom right of the corner. Put it on 0.5 or something. Or by all means, just pop a comment down below if you need any clarification on the methods and techniques explored in this video. To finish my pocket bag off, I just sewed around the 3 open edges to enclose the entire thing. And again, once this is constructed into the outer shell of the bag, all of these raw, frayed parts of the seams are going to be totally enclosed and not able to be seen. So, with that being said, that was my impromptu welt pocket, just drafted and constructed up. I then constructed the remainder of my lining in the same way that I did the exterior, sewing along the 2 short edges and the base, the long line of stitching at the base. Again, this is a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. And then once those 3 seams had been done, I just closed my corners by pulling the diagonal taut and sewing a 1.5 centimeter straight line of stitching to enclose the base. The facing pieces were sewn right sides together, stitching down the short edge, 1.5 centimeter seam allowance again, before attaching the top of the lining to the base of the facing. And then you'll be able to see the same silhouette and structure has come together. We now just need to insert this into the exterior of the tote bag. And so to do that, and with right sides together, I place my lining inside my tote bag and I try and pin around the top edge, leaving a substantial gap for me to turn everything through. Again, it is really important that we have left that space when we are attaching our straps earlier in the construction process, because now we don't want to catch anything when we are sewing our 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So as you work it around the machine, just make sure, if you feel it between your fingertips, that you are pushing the ruffles out of the way, you're ensuring the straps don't get caught, and this will give you a really nice, neat, clean finish. But again, make sure you are leaving a substantial space so that you can turn your bag through. And once you've done that, do exactly that. Pull your lining right side out, everything will be able to tuck in, and you'll be left with a small gap to the top of your facing and top of your tote bag. At the iron, give this a good press, don't shy away, and you'll be able to top stitch around the entire edge. I like to start by one of the straps on the front of the bag, working my way all the way around the top edge, making sure I move the ruffles to the side so they don't get caught with a line of stitching. And if that wasn't the perfect project, then I don't know what playing chicken with my spool of thread can tell you. Look at that for a close call. But that's it, my friend. You have just made a really beautiful, really neutral, timeless, versatile, if I say so myself, tote bag.
And there we have it, guys. This is my beloved canvas tote. I had so much fun with this project. And I know a light lining is actually a bit controversial inside a handbag, but my pet peeve is genuinely dark linings where you can't find anything. Because I literally carry around sketchbooks, my pattern master, laptop, pens, notes, loose leaf pages where I've jotted down inspiration. And there's nothing more frustrating than opening a vast hole and just trying to rummage around and find what you need. And the best part about this being calico and a canvas tote and everything is 100% cotton, I can bung this in the wash, no problem. So I'm really happy with how practical this little make has been. I'm super happy with how fast it was. It was a fun little make. And to support you even further with your creative process, Morplan not only offer 20% off for all student purchases, but if you enter FreeCoffee at checkout at your point of purchase, then you're going to be able to get a £5 coffee voucher to see you through the late nights. And I'm sorry to say, they don't technically go anywhere when you join the fashion industry, whether you're a student, whether you're a hobby sewist. We've all had evenings when we're at our machine, trundling away for hours on end. And I maybe should have done a coffee count in this video, but I definitely think that this tote bag is 90% fueled on a bit of caffeine. So have a little look, go and check out Morplan. A big thank you to them for partnering with me on this video. And this is genuinely a one-stop project. So go and check them out, get your supplies, tag me in social media if you decide to make this. And of course, click the link down below to download your pattern. So stay safe, keep creative, and I will catch you on the flip side.